our morning times and really just jump into things. This is the quasi-conclusion. And it's the series we've called Four. And really we've been asking this question throughout the series. What do we want to be known for? And that's a question about reputation, a question about word on the streets. That's what people, when they talk about, what do they talk about the Bridge Church collectively? But that could also apply to you individually. What do you want to be known for? What do you want to be known for? And what's interesting about reputation is reputation isn't always something that you go out there and try to achieve. It's just kind of given to you. And you may not even want that reputation. You've tried hard against it, but it's given to you one way or another because of good or bad circumstance, whatnot. And the word on the street, we might say, as a nation or as a culture right now, might be this, that more people are more, next slide, more people are more aware of what the church is against than what we're for. And we want to be known for what we're for. And that's not always easy to accomplish. And we ask ourselves, well, what do we want to be known for? The answer is now this. We're for people. We want to be for people. Now, as I thought about that statement, like I said earlier, whether you want it or not, reputations are given. You could work hard and you might get the wrong reputation. And I was thinking about, we want to be known for people, and this story in my life keeps popping up when I think about that. I was a first year at Cal Poly. I wasn't a freshman, but I was first year at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And I was in a nutritional science major, and I was taking a class, second semester, called Maternal and Child Nutrition. Now, a little background just about me in relation to this class. I grew up with two brothers, no sisters. My mom really never dabbled in and kind of tried to explain the feminine body to us, because there's no need to. I had not yet dated a girl to this point, hadn't really been on any dates, never had a girlfriend, so really hadn't had any experiences in the pre-pregnancy, kind of life of a woman, just in their body functions, and so half the class pertained to that. So I was completely in the dark on so many things. Now, the whole class consists of 50 people, 47 of them girls or women, 2 other guys. Both those guys were married. So I was the only one to be in the dark with the first half of the class especially. Now the others is a coin toss on that. So I was having really, oh my goodness, moments throughout the first part, because I literally was learning for the first time so much about what you ladies experience on a regular basis. And so many times throughout the course or that first half of the year, there would be moments in which perhaps I asked a question or I just looked confused, and heads would kind of turn like, are you serious? I'd be like, guess not. I'm not, no, I was a total joke, right? But you get these looks, and sort of those looks, although they're not trying to be mean, the looks sort of say this, do you really belong here? Do you even belong here? Now, the deduction that you have, since I'm picking up the reputation of that room and those looks, is I don't belong here. Now, that was actually a large reason why I got out of nutritional science, because I realized this isn't my wheelhouse here. This is not where I belong, right? Now, I was thinking about being for people. And that idea of, well, maybe I don't really belong here. And it wasn't something they try to say and say, you should get out, but it was the impression, it was the way that they looked, it was the whole kind of demeanor of things that convinced me I don't really belong here. And I remember then thinking about somebody who shared about a friend of theirs that they finally convinced even to come to church with them. And this person had no church background, and they were afraid to come to church, and finally said yes, but they were still afraid because they didn't live the same lifestyle everybody else in there, and there was like, I don't know if I belong there. And they may not see those things, but I know about those things. That right there creates a bit of a barrier. But what they are going to see is they're probably going to see the color of my hair and the tattoos on my body and even the smell the smoke on my breath. And I'm going to feel, and I'm going to get this idea or thought, or people will perceive me as, you don't really belong here. See, reputation isn't always what we're trying to achieve. Sometimes it's just given to us. And people, whether we want to say we're for them or not, oftentimes will say, well, I just don't belong there with you because of one reason or another. And we have to fight hard against that. Fight really hard against that. Because I think the message of the cross, the message of Jesus, really matters that much, that people don't get knocked off at the door before they get in the door, but they get a chance to go, no, you guys are for me, and I get to hear the message of Jesus Christ. I get to hear the message without prejudice or judgment on me. And if you're here, I just want to say that we're glad you're here, especially if you this is your day one. Somebody invited you and you're going, man, do I even belong there? You know, I'm not a Christian. I want to say, I'm glad you're here. And even if you say, I got a shady past, I got a rap sheet, you guys are so good and I'm not. Well, if you just pulled back the curtain a little bit in any of our lives, just dare you to ask, you would find that we're not so far off. That there's a lot of people in here. In fact, this room is full of people who just don't belong in this environment because save the grace of God. So, I want to speak into this morning the different nuances of our hearts that we sometimes aren't fully aware of, that still have categories of those who are included and those who are not, perhaps in the grace of God, in the forness of God. Because we say God is for people. But when we get really down and dirty and honest, there's nuances that kind of don't always believe that. And I think God wants to try to even expose those nuances, because those are the ones that kind of come out in those knee-jerk reactions. And I want to do this kind of conversation by taking a story, an interaction of Jesus with a woman in the Gospels. Now, what's funny about this interaction that's different than every other interaction of Jesus is this one, the person, the individual who's there with Jesus, didn't want to be there. They didn't seek Jesus out. They didn't come to him asking for advice or even looking for forgiveness in any kind of way. They were forced into this against their will. And Jesus' interaction with them, the way he responds, the way he interacts with them, tells us an awful lot both about God and the bigness of his grace. Now, I want to really look at that with you this morning because I think it'll teach our hearts. So if you have your Bibles, turn to John chapter 8. John chapter 8. This is one of the, some authors throughout the centuries have said this is one of their favorite passages of the Bible. This is one that I think for so many, this has become their favorite story of Jesus. John chapter 8. Really, there's no background needed to be given to this, so I can just jump right in. We'll start with verse 2, actually. 8 verse 2 says, early in the morning, Jesus came again to the temple. That's in Jerusalem. And then all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Now, I mean, here's just the scenario. This is a morning time. Jesus goes to the temple, which is not uncommon for people who have of kind of teaching status, rabbis of that day, would go to this temple area and start to teach. Well, Jesus was of such a rapport, a reputation, that people literally canceled their jobs, got off of work, got their kids in daycare, right, so they could be there. And there's a lot of people who showed up because they wanted to hear what this man, whom they were now esteeming as at least a prophet, if not more than that, had to say about God and life and themselves. They sought him out, and they were gathered around, and there was lots of them. Verse 3, the scribes and the Pharisees, who were sort of the religious and cultural elites, the ones who sort of set the standards for people and kind of were the teachers, were a little bit jealous of Jesus, a lot of it jealous actually of Jesus, and so they had this idea. They brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, that is Jesus, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery." Now, question, how do you catch just one person in the act of adultery? That is a fascinating thought. How do you catch just one person in the act of adultery? There's something weird about this from the get-go, right? Usually you catch two people in the act of adultery, right? But in this case, this woman was caught in the act. Not hearsay, not brought to them, but caught in the act. We caught her in the act. Oh, and that's the only person we could find doing the act there. There's a problem taking place here. So either the guy, the other individual, ran off, right? And they didn't see his face, so they don't know his identity before they can kind of grab him, or this was a sting operation. Or she was set up. Or they kind of knew about her lifestyle, her reputation, and they say, we can take advantage of that. And since it would be kind of, again, against God's moral law to have a Jewish man, we'll pay off a Roman soldier who's known for being promiscuous, who's married, to go and invite her into, this relationship and give her some money. Oh, sting operation. So now she is both guilty and the victim in some sense, right? So they walk in on this sting operation. This soldier, because we might say, I'm just kind of speculating, but gets off. They grab her. She's grabbing for her clothes or whatever it is to cover herself as they drag her out that morning. And she's walking half naked, trying to keep herself concealed, and they bring her to Jesus. They throw her in the middle of this crowd, and they say, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. What say you? These guys went to great lengths to get to Jesus. And like I said, she was guilty. She was guilty of her actions. She was also the victim of their agenda. So here's this woman. Verse 5. They said, now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. What do you say? This they said to test him, and that they might have some charge to bring against him. Now, Jesus is presented with kind of a conundrum here, because the law of Moses, which consists of really the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, it has a whole lot of laws, one of which does state that anyone caught in the act of adultery, the 2 of them should be brought and stoned, right? So that is true. And if Jesus were to go against that law, then he would clearly be discredited as some kind of man or prophet of God. His reputation would be discredited among the people there who revered him as coming from God, and clearly the one who holds up the standards of God. So he would be discredited in that regard. But if he said, oh, she should be stoned, absolutely. Well, now Jesus puts himself in another conundrum, because the only person or people in that society who can actually bring capital punishment on another is the Romans. Jews didn't have that authority to do that. And the fact that Jesus is now giving the sentence out puts him as suspects with the Romans. Hey, that guy is actually trying to usurp and become judge and jury, where that's your role. He's kind of accepting that role. So now he becomes kind of a face on the wall of Rome, one that the Jews can leverage to their will. So Jesus is put in a conundrum. And instead of addressing their accusations, here's what he does. These 3 words, I think, are the most important 3 words of our time today. Jesus bent down. He bent down to her. He didn't speak into the accusation. He just bent down. He got down in the dirt first. First thing he did. It was toward her. Let me just say, that's the Christmas story. That's the Christmas story. That Jesus stooped, that God stooped down toward sinful people. That his first movement was toward us. He got down and messy. He took on humanity. This is what we're celebrating right now. That the God whose sandals, we might say, as John said, who we are unworthy even to untie, stooped down to this woman. This is what we're celebrating. That's amazing. Not standing far off in judgment, but stooping down and entering into our mess, stooping down to be with us, hence the name Emmanuel. While everybody was standing over this woman, Jesus stooped down to be with her. He moved toward the one who ruined their life, because that's what God does. No one is too messed up. No one is too sinful. No one is too bad. No one is too dirty. No one is too anything. God's grace is for everyone. Because God's for everyone. His grace is for everyone. Both the guilty, the one who's the victimizer, the one who's ruining people's lives, and the one who's the victim. It goes both directions. She covers both those categories in some ways, right? And he moves toward her, who covers both those categories. both the abused and the abuser. God's grace is for everyone. You know, Matt Chandler, who's a pastor out in Texas, he told a story, I think just hits home so well in this. But he was saying when he was back in college, first year in college, he had a class with, a class he was taking, and one of the people, his next door seatmate, was this 26-year-old single mom who was coming back to school to get her degree. And this mom wasn't someone who loved Jesus, didn't follow Jesus, never been to church, didn't know anything about God, and so he tried to really just share with her about God's grace. He would do favors for them, her son needed to be babysat. She would go on a date, which happened to be with a married man. But he and a friend would go over and babysit her son for her. Well, at one point, one of Matt's friends was going to be playing, who was a worship leader at a church. So he invited her to go to hear him play. Now, kind of hear him play, right, but also knowing that it's the church. And she said yes, so she went with him and his friends. At that church service, after his friend played, and he did a great job. Everyone enjoyed it. Then the preacher got up, and he said, I want to talk to you today about sex. And kind of the big point had to do with this rose that he pulled out. And Matt said he pulled out this rose, and he looked at it, talked about its beauty and how it felt so, and it smelled amazing. And then he took the rose and he threw it out into the crowd, and he said, hey, I want you to smell that rose. And I want you to touch that rose and look at that rose, right? And pass it along to everybody there, right? So you all get to smell it and touch it. And touch its beauty and see and behold it. Then he went on to talk about his message, 30 minutes or so. And then at the end of that message, he said, where's that rose? Where's that rose? Bring it up here. And some college student ran up there with it. It was a room full of college students. Brought it up there, handed it to him, and it was wilted. Petals were falling off. It was just ruined. And he looks at that rose. He says, who would want this rose now? Who in the world would possibly want this rose now? And he wasn't saying it as a question. He was saying it as a condemnation. You don't want to be this rose because nobody wants you. Don't give your life because nobody, and Matt said that his insides were just turning as this woman who was next to him was just squirming in her seat, getting uncomfortable, and he felt like he just wanted to stand up and say, Jesus wants that rose. Jesus wants that rose. That's the gospel. Jesus died. Jesus gave his life. Jesus gave the ultimate price. He paid an extensive cost for that person who had been handled and touched and engaged by so many. Jesus wants that rose. He wants to buy that rose. He wants to walk with that rose. He wants to hold that rose. He wants it. Jesus came and gave his life for people who've ruined theirs. So if you've ruined your life, then he came for you. If you say, I've ruined my marriage, I've destroyed or damaged my kids, perhaps even abused, I've had an abortion, I've destroyed people, I've destroyed lives because of my actions. And maybe some of those actions and those regrets and those things that you've done has been actions bore out of things that you've had done to you. Maybe you're the victim and you're hurting. Maybe your alcohol has destroyed people that you love, or your anger has destroyed people that you've loved. You look back and you see things done to you and how you're the victim now living out the victimizing. Jesus is shouting to you that he wants you. His grace is for you because that's the kind of God he is. And Jesus bent down, the Christmas story we might say, and it says, and he wrote with his finger in the ground. Now, we don't really know what he wrote. That's not said here, and people speculate over time, but let me just give you my speculation. As he got down there and he bent down and he started to write, I think he might be writing her sins. Looking her in the face and writing them. This wouldn't be the first time Jesus did something like this. Remember, there's a woman that Jesus met at a well one time, and he actually told her what she had done. As she left that conversation and went into the village, told everybody, hey, this guy told me all that I did. I mean, that's not exactly the way that you might want to say it, but there is something about the way Jesus did it that left her feeling hopeful, not condemned. And Jesus down here with this woman, writing out her sin, looking at her, I know everything about you, more than you know, and I'm here with you. I know all, not just this one accusation, all of it. I know everything about you. More than they even know about. All those secrets, I know all of that. And the people are kind of wondering what's going on. Why are you sitting down there? Why are you doing this? And Jesus, not answering their question, verse 7, as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And then once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left with the woman. Now again, we don't know what he wrote, but maybe, again, this time, he had those sins that she had kind of committed her life there, and the look in his eyes were, but now he's writing their names next to those same sins. He's writing, you guys aren't much different than her. You really aren't much different than her. And it says they start to go away one by one because they realize, I would suggest, that they are just as exposed now as she was. And anybody who is being exposed, right, the things you want to cover up being exposed all of a sudden, what do you want to do? You want to hide. You want to leave. Get out of the public setting. She was not afforded that luxury, but they were. And so they started to move away. Move away. I don't want to be seen. And even the original crowd walked away. Those who showed up to Jesus that day to hear him teach, to hear this man from God teach. And when they saw this part, they had to walk away also. They had to leave. They had to distance themselves from those accusations. You know, I was thinking, as I thought about that, I was thinking, I'm really glad that you guys don't know all that I think about you, and I'm sure you're glad you don't think all I think about me, right? I mean, there's some things in your heart and mind you're glad people don't know about. This is why we love Facebook, because we can put the selective things on there. And you think you're doing so good, but you know inside, this is a facade of me. This isn't the real me. Everybody thinks that I'm better than I am, but no, I'm really not. It's nice to have them think that way, but I know the difference, but I can convince myself that I'm not really who I really am because they think of me differently. What if God would expose our sins and all of a sudden we in this room could see the pride and all of its expressions, the greed and the self-centeredness and the hoarding and the jealousy and the lust and the anger and all of its expressions that we have felt and done and acted toward to people in this room and outside this room and our families and friends. What if all of a sudden we saw that? If he showed us who we really are, we might just do the same thing, right? Start walking out one by one. This isn't all that's removed from us. See, but what the crowd should have done, what the crowd should have done, this is me conjecturing, but they should have joined that woman on the ground. They should have stooped. They should have said, that's me. I'm no different than her. That's me. I'm no different than her. But they didn't believe that. They still believed that they were different than her. Sure, they weren't perfect, but they weren't like this woman. I refuse to believe that I'm actually like that person right there. So at the end of the day, the people who came to Jesus to find God left without seeing him, and the one person who didn't want to be there saw him. We sometimes wonder where God is, and the answer to that is usually he's stooping down. He's on the ground. He's getting dirty right now. And he's waiting for you and I to stop trying to stand so tall, so put together, so accomplished, so beneath the standard of good, and to just stoop. See, even though God's grace is for everyone, only those who stoop experience it. Matthew 23:12, just a sidebar, Jesus once said a few weeks later after the scene, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. But no one stayed. No one stayed. No one stooped. Everyone left, and they missed out on the best part of Jesus. Verse 10, Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Now go and leave your life of sin." Now, when I read that, I think that sounds too simplistic. Oh yeah, I'll just go and leave my life of sin. I mean, that might be simple sounding if it's like, hey, just stop shooting people right now, but we all realize that our sins are much more involved than just a simple don't shoot people anymore. In fact, maybe for her situation, this was a livelihood. What do I do now? Where do I go? Who do I stay with? There's no place to go. How do I take care of myself at this point? I must continue in what I know how to do in order to stay alive. It's much more complex. Who would hire me at this point? This sounds a little too simplistic, doesn't it? But what Jesus was doing, well, is he was inviting her to imagine. See, I believe some of us have been living with alcohol or anger or worry or pornography or bitterness or uncontrolled lust for so long that it's hard for us to imagine life without it. It's hard because what does this look like and that look like and too many things going on? What does this mean if I actually made this shift? It's hard to imagine. We have been living in that life for so long and our hearts have forgotten what it's like to imagine that God really can restore and redeem and change our circumstances, that he is working with us. That's hard for us to imagine those things. And he's inviting her to imagine. Because as we start to go, the devil has been working overtime on you and I to keep us dependent on those things. And he's not just saying, don't sin no more. He's saying, let me help you. Let me show you. Let me empower you to sin. Because the word order is really, really important. He doesn't say, go and sin no more so I won't condemn you. He says, neither do I condemn you. Now go and leave your life of sin. See, God's acceptance of you isn't the reward for you cleaning yourself up. It's what empowers you to do it. It's the power. His acceptance is the empowering factor for you to start taking steps and walk into the freedom that you really do want, but can't imagine what it'd be like without that sin. To leave those things. Every time she falls and she hears the accusing voice of the devil saying, you see, you know who you really are, she will hear and be able to hear the voice of Jesus, neither do I condemn you. I still don't condemn you. Now, just bring it to you. Maybe you think your life is too far ruined. Man, you've been living with this pornography addiction or this anger or this alcohol. This has become your coping. This is what gives you some kind of balance in life maybe. This worry or jealousy or you name the scenario that gets a hold of you. I can't imagine what life is like. I just can't imagine what that would be like. It seems like I'm past the point of no return. It's too strong of a hold. And Jesus is saying, you can leave that because I am not done stooping for you. I'm not done stooping for you. See, that's Christmas. And that's why this series is so important right now. I'll close with a quote from Max Lucado, who wrote a book called In the Grip of Grace, as the band comes up. Ponder the achievement of God, he calls us to. God doesn't condone our sin, nor does he compromise his standard. He doesn't ignore our rebellion, nor does he relax his demands. Rather than dismiss our sin, he assumes our sin and incredibly sentences himself. God is still holy, sin is still sin, and we are redeemed. God does what we cannot do, so we can be what we dare not dream, perfect before God. You know, one of the things that's, the reasons I think that this, we got to be reminded of over and over because we just forget. And Jesus knew we'd forget. He just knew it. We would revert kind of back to, look how good I am and my own achievement, and so Jesus gave us a meal. He gave us a meal because we eat all the time. We got to eat 3 times a day, right? And he's got, we're going to give you a meal, so you will be remembering 3 times a day if you have to, about my goodness, about my grace, how big it is for you, and how much you and I, myself, need it. And so this morning we're gonna eat that meal. Now here's the thing. If you are here thinking, this meal is, I've earned this, I'm good enough to take this meal, right? Because I've been humble enough this week, I believe enough this week. No, it's not about earning anything. I'm not deserving anything. This is a meal for people who don't deserve it. People who realize I don't belong at this table, save the grace of God. And even if you're sitting there going, God, my goodness, this is so fresh and so new in my mind. And this is your first time with us this morning. Jesus saying, I'm inviting you in to eat this and inviting you in to reflect upon and remember how big my goodness is to you and what I've done on your behalf. So the ushers come forward, take the cup, they're stacked up, and when they're all passed out, we'll take it together.